So sustainable growth is going to come from government discipline, getting out of the way of ordinary South Africans taking businesses from small to medium and medium to large. And that third step specifically requires cutting red tape.
Stats SA has recently published the latest employment figures for South Africa, which paints a dire picture of labor conditions in the country. Here to discuss more on this is Gabriel Crouse, Head of Campaigns at the Institute of Race Relations. Gabriel, what do the latest employment figures tell us about the labor market?
It's not good news, Bheki. Under the official definition of unemployment, we are looking at over 35%, which I'm pretty sure is the highest we've ever seen. And on the expanded definition, it remains above 46% unemployment. When we look at IRR opinion polling, we find consistently that unemployment is identified as the #1 problem in this country. And if you compare our employment rates to international peers, you can see exactly why. I just want to jump in and say that some people might think that our unemployment figures are simply a result of COVID-19, and they should be wary. If you compare where we are today to before the pandemic, we have lost over 1.9 million jobs. And it could be higher depending on how you qualify informal sector work. Look at India, look at Argentina, look at Turkey, look at Brazil, and you find countries in some ways, India, for example, much poorer than us, GDP per capita, emerging markets that have bounced back to where they were in employment terms before the pandemic, or are even better off at this stage. South Africa is nowhere nearly there. And this is why I think it's important to remember Dr. Anthea Jeffrey's term, the 10-year economic lockdown. South Africa went into the pandemic with flat employment numbers, a growing population, ultimately decreasing gross fixed capital formation and huge capital flight. That was then exacerbated by the pandemic. Over 2 million jobs lost, very few regained. And this is South Africa's biggest problem.
So Gabriel, from a policy perspective, what has led South Africa to its downward spiral?
Unfortunately, we have had long-standing policies that are openly hostile to value-add business. The forefront of this, the sharp end of the spear, has been race-based policy, which has incentivized rent-seeking, has exacerbated the most pernicious kind of inequality, which is basically rent-seeking, where people are not adding value, but because of connections that they have through government force, wealth is redistributed effectively from the poor to the connected, as well as a broader program of expanding the size of government while failing to boost the efficiency thereof. This has created a much higher debt level. This has created, in turn, a much more expensive cost of taking on debt. When you look at the budget for 2022-2023, the highest line item, the highest single line item is now debt servicing costs. It was second behind education. It is now trumped up to the top. This is very bad news in a country whose biggest contributor to GDP, whose main competitive advantage on the continent is the financial services sector. That's all been junked together with the sovereign, which further freezes capital flows, the allocation of assets that can be mixed with labor to do productive work in a more efficient way. So if you look at the debt, if you look at the race-based laws, you sort of see two major arms, pincers really squeezing in around business. The third, I'm afraid, kind of comes from business itself. So when you have laws that are nominally anti-competitive, but which really set up barriers to entry to new players, established businesses get this incumbent advantage. And we see this in basically every major sector in South Africa, maybe with some exceptions in agriculture and education, but really South Africa has become a sort of oligopolistic business space because so much red tape makes it difficult for new businesses to get in. Existing businesses can take advantage of that situation. I think those three begin to scratch the surface of South Africa's problems. But really, if you want to get into the details, we could talk all week about the government policies that have let South Africa down. Now, that's not to say that exogenous factors like the COVID pandemic, like the war currently being prosecuted by Russia in Ukraine, have not further exacerbated the problems. The latter also creates opportunities with commodities becoming more expensive in South Africa, being a huge net exporter of goods whose prices increased several fold in some cases. That all notwithstanding, we can't take advantage of the perverse opportunities, and we can't guard ourselves, unfortunately, against the world's major shocks because our fundamentals are so eroded.
So then, Gabriel, what should South Africa do to emulate some of the countries that you've stated in your earlier statement?
If South Africa wants to follow the well-worn path to economic growth, jobs growth, investment growth, we need to do what's worked every time. First things first, merit over all else. It's very important that people are judged by what they do, by the products and goods that they can deliver, and not by arbitrary social identity factors over which they don't have any control. So that needs to be dealt with. The second thing is it's important to liberalize labor markets. People must have maximum freedom to sell their time, their energy, their talents, their goods, and their services in the most competitive way that they can. And employers need to have the ability to identify employees that are doing well and promote them, and identify employees that are letting the team down and let them go. It's a tough world. It turns out that when you allow that to happen, there are more jobs to go around. The third thing that needs to happen is that governments need to be smart. They need to continue playing the game of hiring people, but they need to stop thinking about them. Our government needs to stop thinking about itself as the ultimate source for jobs. Government depends on other people in the private sector making money and then paying taxes. So sustainable growth is going to come from government discipline, getting out of the way of ordinary South Africans taking businesses from small to medium and medium to large. And that third step specifically requires cutting red tape that otherwise protects extremely large businesses from upcoming players' competition.
Thank you, Gabriel. We now leave this to you, the viewer. What are your opinions of South Africa's current unemployment levels? Just a reminder that the CRA will be hosting a client-exclusive webinar on the skills shortage in the country tomorrow. If you're not a client of the CRA, please click on the link below to your 30-day free trial where you have access to that webinar. Until next time, take care.